Okay, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to the next reaction video. This time I'm taking a look at the problem with autonomous freight trains from WorldWideRailfan. I've seen news about all this kind of stuff popping up lately, and so naturally I'm more curious to see what they're all about. But I already have a bad feeling about them. And I feel like at worst, they're probably going to be the reason that more railroaders will lose their jobs if this type of technology is pursued. So let's get to it.
For the past 200 years, the most efficient mode of freight transportation has been trains, and since the 1800s, not much has changed. More than 2 centuries since their invention, powerful locomotives pull steel-wheeled rail cars over steel rails, and aside from more efficient locomotive and rail car designs,
Hey, is that an old Amtrak boxcar? I also noticed this streetcar in the back. But is that an old Amtrak boxcar? Can anybody clarify that to me in the comments, please?
the basic makeup of a freight train has remained much the same. In recent years, however, the industry has seen a surge in interest from tech startups aiming to modernize freight rail, and among these innovations are autonomous trains and rail cars. How did we get here, and is this really the future?
Well, I certainly hope not, and I'm not a big believer in it. Much like how I'm not a big believer in battery and hydrogen powered locomotives. They don't seem that practical. Now, I'm no expert or scientist or railroader or anything. However, I do have a right to express myself in these things and just talk on what I know. That may not make much sense to some of you, but I'm always willing to learn more about this kind of stuff. And so far from what I've seen, I'm not that all convinced.
Just a quick disclaimer before we begin. In this video, I talk about a handful of tech startups in the rail industry. I just want to preface everything by saying that I'm not an investor in any of these startups. I'm merely just a rail fan talking about what's going on in the rail industry.
Yep, and there is such thing as criticism. Nobody and nothing is immune to criticism. There is such thing as fair use, and just to simply criticize something, constructive feedback, all that kind of stuff does exist. And it especially matters if you introduce it in a respectful and civil manner and all that kind of stuff. Like, I also welcome some criticism here. As long as you're respectful, I will listen to what you may have to say. And as a rail fan and train enthusiast myself, I have a right to express myself in what interests me and what I may like and dislike in these sort of kind of things. So let's get back on topic. Sorry, I know I ramble a lot, but still.
Now that we've got that out of the way, let's jump in. The late 90s and early 2000s, for better or for worse, saw the rise of independent tech startups trying to innovate in the transportation industry. While the rail industry remained relatively untouched, the landscape began to shift in the 2010s. With growing concerns about climate change, rail became a focal point for innovation. While most innovations focused on improving existing technology, such as lowering locomotive emissions and automating train operations, by the end of the decade, various startups set out to effectively reinvent rail freight logistics. In 2020, a group of former SpaceX engineers founded Parallel Systems, envisioning it as a completely new era in rail freight. They set out to design battery-electric, autonomous wheel sets capable of carrying individual shipping containers over the rails. These cars were intended to increase shipping efficiency, being able to move both on their own and in multi-car platoons, in theory making them a solution for both last-mile and long-distance rail shipping. Additionally, when implemented in conjunction with microterminals, they would be able to bring containers closer to their final destination and load and unload them faster, ultimately taking trucks off the road and avoiding the oftentimes lengthy process of container processing in traditional intermodal terminals.
Taking away the jobs of trucks. Like, I already see numerous red flags with this proposed idea. not only would it be taking away more jobs away from railroaders, but also truckers potentially. Like, this is one of the main reasons why I'm not a big believer in this kind of technology. It'll most likely lead to people losing more jobs.
By 2022, after 2 years of development, Parallel Systems unveiled its prototype railcar to the public, attracting media attention not only from rail news outlets, but from multiple mainstream news sources. Along with the photos and videos of the prototype car in action, Parallel Systems announced that they were backed by $50 million in private investment,
$50 million.
making it clear that this project was going to continue to move forward. While some saw Parallel Systems as the future of freight transportation in the United States, many people, mostly those well-versed in railroads, criticized this project for a myriad of reasons which I'll get to later. Nevertheless, all publicity is good publicity, as Parallel Systems soon received a $4.4 million federal grant to test these cars at the Transportation Technology Center in Colorado. Not long after, Union Pacific, the country's biggest freight railroad, expressed interest in the technology, saying that though it had some hurdles to overcome, they would be keeping an eye on it. Even more notably, in 2023, Genesee & Wyoming, a massive rail holdings company, announced its intentions to test these autonomous trains on 2 short-line railroads in Georgia. More on that later. Unfortunately for Parallel Systems, this is just about where the positives end. Since showing its prototype to the public in 2022, Parallel Systems has received endless criticism from railroads and rail fans alike. First off, autonomous trains have never operated on mainline rails in the United States. Yes, they do exist in a few places, but they're generally isolated rapid transit lines that are free of at-grade crossings and are relatively easy to automate. Mainline freight railroads are far less controlled. For example, at-grade crossings mean trains have to interact with cars on the roads, unprotected tracks can be obstructed and/or damaged by natural disasters and debris, and in the case of small freight spurs, switches and other infrastructure are still manually controlled.
Yeah, and I already see these things being a disaster if put on the test in mainline freight. There would be even more crossing grade accidents and possibly more derailments with these things being autonomous and not controlled by a human.
Though these pod trains will feature accident avoidance systems and will be able to stop much faster than traditional trains, it'll not only be hard to get them approved for use on railroads, but it'll be hard to perfect their accident avoidance systems to the point where they can safely operate on their own. If self-driving cars, a far more refined technology, is any sign of things, this is no small feat.
Marking autonomous vehicles as traffic hazards. The group Safe Street Rebels is placing cones on Cruise and Waymo cars as a way to temporarily stop them. They want these cars off the road permanently.
According to the group, using a traffic cone on top of the car disables it.
In addition to this engineering conundrum, the basic
When Doug and Andre came to TurboTax,
we navigated a turbulent housing
design of these cars is questionable at best. The individual wheelset design means the structure of the car is entirely dependent on the shipping container, which is relatively crunchy compared to traditional rail equipment. This means that in any altercation between a Parallel Systems pod train and a traditional train, the pod train will be completely destroyed. These pod trains are also only capable of carrying one container, no double stacking, so even when compared to intermodal well cars, they're less efficient with space. That gets me to a few more points on how these cars lack efficiency. They're the aerodynamic equivalent of a brick, so unless these trains are running in 100 plus car platoons, mainline operations will be pretty inefficient. As of now, we still don't know how long these platoons can get, so if Parallel Systems has any intention of using these to replace mainline container trains, this could be an issue. Finally, the power source of these pods, battery electric, is not.
Well, aside from the obvious battery electric, how are you going to get these things to work with regular intermodal rail cars? How are they supposed to connect to them in particular? Like, I don't know how that would work in practice.
Is not nearly as efficient as traditional overhead electrification. I've made this point countless times in videos, but the process of making lithium-ion batteries is expensive and terrible for the environment. Also, I imagine that the process of replacing cells in thousands of individual wheel sets will be tedious and expensive in the long run.
Yep.
I just really don't see any context in which these will make sense for long-distance shipping, and in the case of last mile or local deliveries, spurs will need significant upgrades in order to make these work. As if that wasn't enough, in order to make railroads compatible with parallel systems, they'll have to build all new micro-terminals for unloading and loading. Ultimately, parallel systems pod trains are inefficient, not that great for the environment, inconvenient, potentially dangerous, and will need significant regulatory changes before they can enter service. In September of 2023, Parallel Systems released a second-generation prototype of its autonomous rail car, and it improved on some of the drawbacks of the original design. First off, the concern of structural rigidity was for the most part eliminated when they switched from the independent wheel sets to a more flat car-like design. In addition to this major change, its operating range was improved to 500 miles between charges, and finally the train's platooning ability was demonstrated on a test track in Fillmore, California.
So these couplers that they've got like magnetic or something, and at least the structure of these cars is more sturdy and such, like what was just shown. But I still don't think they would be safe to run. I really don't. And I've already explained that I'm not a big believer in this kind of stuff. But if there's anything else I should know about these and the technology behind them, please let me know down below. And obviously anything disrespectful or inappropriate will be deleted.
Despite my many criticisms of parallel systems, I gotta say, this is pretty sick. Despite all of its drawbacks, rail companies, particularly Genesee and Wyoming, are still quite interested in the prospect of fully autonomous trains. Since late 2023, G&W has been trying to convince the Federal Railroad Administration to waive certain safety regulations in order to test these cars on the Georgia Central Railway and the Heart of Georgia Railroad. As of right now, the FRA has acknowledged G&W's request and will be holding a public meeting on March 12, 2024. More meetings will likely follow this one, in addition to times when the FRA will be accepting public comments, and after that the FRA will make a decision on whether parallel systems can be tested. If they rule in their favor, the dream stays alive. If not, parallel systems will most likely be forced to either repurpose its design in some way, or more pessimistically, close its doors. Until then, they forge on, awaiting FRA approval. While Parallel Systems is clearly the most well-established player in the autonomous freight train game, there are a couple of other startups that are worth mentioning. In June of 2023, Houston-based startup Autonomous Intermodal LLC announced its intentions to design and manufacture an autonomous intermodal train set capable of carrying the same amount, if not more, containers than current double-stack trains. They plan to do this by building 4,000-foot intermodal train sets, or double-stack platforms as they call them, that can be connected to build 16,000-foot double-stack trains. Though similar in concept to traditional intermodal well cars, Autonomous Intermodal's double-stack platforms, or DSPs, will have a smaller gap between containers, reducing drag and also allowing for around 20% more containers per train. Additionally, the DSPs will feature more efficient braking systems, enhanced container security, and will be lighter than current cars, ultimately making what they hope will be the next big step in rail intermodal technology. More importantly, Autonomous Intermodal wants to build autonomous traction platforms, or ATPs, machines intended to replace traditional locomotives. These 9,000 horsepower machines will be fully autonomous and will be placed throughout
9,000
trains to evenly
horsepower.
distribute power. According to Autonomous Intermodal, the initial units may be diesel-powered, but they will adapt to industry standards, creating zero-emissions variants when needed. Being that this startup
Zero emissions crap, blah, blah, blah. And now these autonomous locomotives, you say? Like, these are, once again, showing that they're only going to do nothing but take away workers' jobs away. More and more jobs to be lost if these things ultimately become prevalent and are actually used. But like any kind of automated stuff like that, I'm kind of speechless at this point when it comes to this autonomous and automated machinery and stuff. Like, it just makes me fear the worst when it comes to jobs in general. And this stuff is not any better. Go ahead.
Is less than a year old. Its plans and renderings are still pretty basic at this point, and it has a long way to go before hitting the rails. Like parallel systems, these trains' autonomous capabilities are subject to approval by the FRA, but what I like about this company is that if the government doesn't rule in favor of autonomous trains, Autonomous Intermodal LLC will be able to easily shift its focus towards redesigning the standard intermodal well car. Though I'm still not the biggest fan of autonomous freight trains, I think that this startup shows a good amount of promise thanks to its more achievable design. I could totally see railroads switching to these more efficient cars in the future. Autonomous Intermodal LLC is a startup that I could see becoming something the industry adopts, but a startup that seems a lot less realistic is Glide.
What
Founded
the
in
hell?
2022, this California startup is designing what they call the first autonomous road-to-rail solution. Their unique concept involves seamlessly transitioning from road to rail with a specialized vehicle aptly named a glider, equipped with retractable steel wheels for rail operations. Unlike Autonomous Intermodal, it seems that Glide is going by the more traditional startup playbook with an attractive website featuring impressive renderings reminiscent of Tesla's Cybertruck. As seen here, gliders will
And that Cybertruck was a joke. Like, does everything need to be Elon Muskified at this point? No, they don't. And just leave trains alone. They don't need to be modernized again. They don't need to be batterified. They don't need any of that stuff. I mean, maybe in the near future, if it's really needed, start going more on the electric route, depending if it's, more of a growing concern, which it could happen. And sometimes I'm a little concerned about what is ultimately planned if it gets to that point. Both these proposed solutions of battery and hydrogen, I'm not convinced by. And I'm especially not convinced by autonomous stuff and things like this that would only take people's jobs away and would not be practical. They don't seem practical, and they just seem stupid.
attach to either end of a trailer to move it on the road, and in this picture you'll see that they'll use their retractable wheels to operate on train tracks. From this rendering, it appears that gliders will use the design based on the Hummer EV, but from other renderings, this resemblance is less evident.
That truck was also
The glider prototype is said to be making its debut later this year, and when it does, it'll begin testing at the Port of Woodland, Washington. Like parallel systems, I don't think the Glide will ever be used on freight mainlines, but it could possibly have some niche uses in intermodal terminals. I guess that'll be seen when it begins testing in the near future. Ultimately, I question whether any of these startups will see any widespread success, but I do think that there could be a few niche applications for these technologies.
maybe.
Many of these startups see rail as an ancient technology that never changes, and for the most part that's true. Where the startups are wrong, however, is that the rail industry isn't resistant to change due to a lack of innovation, rather it's just been nearly perfected for more than 200 years. Unfortunately, in 2024, there's not that much that we can do to innovate further. Overhead electrified trains are still the most efficient form of land transportation, and it's been that way since the 1880s. Trying to Elon Muskify them will not change them. Still,
Like I
money
said.
talks, and as long as these startups have investors and interest from railroads, they'll continue to exist. It'll certainly be interesting to see where they go, and if you want to follow along with these unique startups, make sure to subscribe because I'll be following along with all their developments in my Rail News series. With that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon in another video.
Well, guys, that's going to do it for this reaction. Please let me know what you think down below. Any additional information about autonomous freight trains you would like to share down below to help educate me further about them, please share down below. And please be respectful and polite about this kind of thing, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels strongly about these things. But at the end of the day, we're adults and we can handle differing opinions here. Just be respectful and polite is all I ask. And I'm always open to learning more about these sort of things. So anyway, guys, the video will be in the description down below if you want to see it for yourself. Have a good day, everybody, and I will see y'all next time.